Quarterback coach Mike Bajakian just gave the most revealing interview of the entire Cleveland Browns offseason, and I need to break this down for you piece by piece, because buried inside 30 minutes of casual conversation is information that changes how we should all be thinking about this quarterback room. This isn't speculation. This isn't a hot take built on nothing, the kind you see thrown around for clicks without a shred of evidence behind it. This is the man who spends every single day in that room with Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, Dillon Gabriel, and now Dillon Gabe, laying out exactly what he's seeing behind closed doors, away from the cameras, away from the noise, away from every talking head who's never stepped foot inside that building. And what he said about Shedeur Sanders in particular deserves way more attention than it's gotten so far, because if you actually listen to the specifics instead of skimming the headlines, this interview tells a completely different story than the one being pushed across most of the football internet right now. Let me set the scene first, because context matters here more than people realize. Bajakian isn't some random hire grabbing headlines for attention. This is a guy with over 30 years in coaching, the overwhelming majority of it spent at the collegiate level as an offensive coordinator, before eventually bouncing between a couple of NFL stints later in his career. He spent 3 years in Tampa working directly under Todd Monken, the very same Todd Monken who now runs Cleveland's offense and who brought him in specifically because of that shared history. That relationship goes back almost a decade. When Monken called him for this job, Bajakian didn't hesitate. He called it a no-brainer, a chance to keep learning from a coach he genuinely considers one of the sharpest offensive minds he's ever worked alongside. He described his time under Monken in Tampa as something close to a re-education in football, a heavy statement from a man who'd already been coaching for over 20 years at that point. So when this man speaks about quarterback evaluation, he's speaking from a foundation most analysts simply don't have. He's not watching 4 snaps on a Sunday broadcast and building an entire narrative off vibes. He's not reacting to a single bad interception and extrapolating it into a referendum on a young man's career. He's in the building every single day, drilling mechanics, dissecting film frame by frame, shaping how these young men think about the position. That distinction matters enormously, and it gets lost way too often in how we talk about quarterback evaluation in this league. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. The interviewer set up a direct comparison, asking Bajakian to break down all 4 quarterbacks currently in that room, starting with Deshaun Watson. And look, I want to be fair to what he said about Watson too, because it matters for context. He talked about Watson's physical tools, the arm talent everybody already knows about, the athleticism that's never really been in question. But then he said something that genuinely caught my attention. He said, what struck him most in the brief time he's spent with Watson isn't the arm at all. It's Watson's ability to process information quickly, to translate different schemes and terminology into what Cleveland is currently running. He called it the most important element of being a quarterback, full stop, and said it's a strength that's hard for outsiders to evaluate because it doesn't show up clearly on tape the way arm strength or athleticism does. He called Watson a professional, someone handling everything the coaching staff is throwing at him, and made a point of saying they aren't holding anything back. They're deliberately throwing a lot at all of these guys to see how much each one can absorb. That's real, and we should acknowledge it honestly. Watson is clearly putting in work, clearly showing up prepared, and after everything this organization has invested in him both financially and reputationally, of course they want to see real, tangible growth there. I'm not going to pretend that part of the interview didn't happen or wasn't said with genuine conviction. But then the conversation shifted to the younger guys in the room, and this is where things got genuinely fascinating, where the tone of the entire interview changed in a way you could practically feel through the screen. Because when Bajakian started talking about Shedeur Sanders specifically, his entire energy shifted. You could hear it in his voice. This wasn't generic coach speak, the kind of diplomatic say-nothing answer we're all used to hearing in these off-season interviews where everybody insists everyone is doing great and nobody actually tells you anything substantive or real. This was specific. This was detailed. This was a 30-year coaching veteran who has clearly thought deeply, repeatedly, about what he's been watching unfold on that practice field. He said he's been impressed as heck with Shedeur's work ethic and football knowledge, and he admitted flat out, without hedging, that he didn't fully know what to expect walking into this job. Sit with that for a second, because it's a bigger admission than it might initially sound like. A coach with 3 decades of experience, who has seen every conceivable type of quarterback prospect come through every conceivable type of program at every level of this sport, is telling you on camera that he didn't fully know what he was getting with Shedeur Sanders, and then, in the very same breath, he tells you he's blown away by what he's actually seen. That's not filler. That's not coach speak designed purely to protect a rookie's confidence in front of cameras. That's a man being genuinely, visibly surprised by what he's watching develop in real time on his own practice field, and choosing to say so publicly, even with everything swirling around this quarterback room in the media. But it's the next part of the interview that really got me, the part I think deserves the most attention of anything said in that entire conversation. Bajakian described Shedeur's vision of the field in a way that I genuinely haven't heard applied to many rookie quarterbacks, let alone one who's facing this much public scrutiny, this much trade speculation, and this much manufactured doubt from outside the building. He gave a specific, concrete example, not a vague compliment. He said there have been moments in practice where Shedeur does something that doesn't immediately make sense to him as a coach, watching it live, in real time, standing right there on the field. He'll see the throw happen and think to himself, wait, what did he just see there? What is he even doing? And then later, when he goes back and reviews the practice film frame by frame on his own time, he discovers that Shedeur had actually read the safety correctly the entire time. The safety had sat on the underneath route, the crosser, and Shedeur recognized that window opening up over the top before the play had even fully developed, and he trusted what he saw enough to let the ball go early. Think about what that actually means from a pure coaching and evaluation perspective, because this is the part people are skipping over. That's not arm strength. That's not measurables you can time at a combine. That's processing speed. That's anticipation. That's a quarterback seeing the defense before the defense has even finished showing its hand, and trusting that read enough to release the football on rhythm, rather than waiting for absolute confirmation. Bajakian didn't just casually say Shedeur has good vision as a passing comment. He specifically said it's high praise precisely because it's hard to evaluate and hard to identify on tape unless you're studying it as closely, as obsessively, as a dedicated position coach does every single day. He's essentially telling all of us that the exact qualities making Shedeur effective right now are the qualities that don't always show up clearly in a quick highlight reel breakdown on social media, but show up immediately and unmistakably to the people coaching him in person, day after day, rep after rep. And I want to pause here for a second, because this matters enormously in the broader conversation surrounding Shedeur Sanders this offseason. There's been this persistent narrative, and you've probably seen it across different corners of football media if you've been paying attention at all, that questions his readiness, that frames every single rookie mistake as quiet confirmation of doubts that existed long before he was even drafted. Meanwhile, here's his actual quarterback coach, the man with direct daily access to exactly how he processes the game at the highest level of detail, describing him as playing with veteran-level anticipation on a consistent basis. Not flashes, not raw, unrefined potential. Active, repeated, specific examples of reading coverage like a player who's been doing this far longer than a single professional season. That gap between the outside narrative and the inside reality is honestly one of the more striking things about this entire interview, and I think it's worth sitting with for longer than most people seem willing to. Now let's talk about Dillon Gabriel for a second too, because Bajakian grouped him directly with Shedeur in terms of being around all offseason and being genuine professionals about their preparation habits. He praised both of their work ethics specifically, saying they come in every single morning and every single night, having already studied, already understanding what the team is about to install before it's even formally taught to them in the building. That's the kind of preparation that builds trust with a coaching staff fast, and it's one of the quieter, less flashy ways young players actually climb depth charts in this league. Not through highlight reel flash plays, but through reliability, through consistency, through never once being caught unprepared when the lights come on. It's an underrated trait, and Bajakian clearly values it highly in how he evaluates these young men. Then there's Dylan Gabe, the newest addition to this quarterback room, and Bajakian's description of him was almost the exact opposite framing compared to how he discussed the other three. He called him a unicorn, acknowledged there are still some mechanical things that need refinement, some rawness that comes with being so new to this level of football. He acknowledged there's clay to work with there, tools that still need shaping over time, but he made it clear that intelligence and the ability to absorb coaching quickly are genuine, real strengths, specifically pointing to his background working under one of Monken's old coaching connections out west. It's a totally different developmental track from where Shedeur and Dylan Gabriel currently sit, and that distinction matters quite a bit when you're trying to figure out the actual internal pecking order in this room, rather than the speculative one floating around endlessly on social media and message boards. Here's what I keep coming back to, though, the thing that just doesn't sit right with everything we've been hearing elsewhere. All this trade speculation, all these persistent rumors swirling around Shedeur Sanders, supposedly being unhappy, supposedly being on the trade block, supposedly looking for any way out of Cleveland, it just doesn't line up at all with what his own position coach is describing on camera. You don't see a 30-year veteran coach speak this specifically, this enthusiastically, this confidently about a player's football intelligence and field vision if that player is disengaged, checked out mentally, or actively trying to force his way to a different franchise. Coaches choose their words extremely carefully in these public settings, especially with everything that's been swirling in the media around this exact quarterback room over the past several months. If Bajakian wanted to give a safe, generic, forgettable answer here, he absolutely could have. Plenty of coaches do exactly that in these situations. Instead, he gave specific examples. He told an actual story about reviewing practice tape and being genuinely surprised by what he found on it. That's not the language of someone carefully managing a difficult or tense situation behind the scenes. That's the language of someone who is genuinely, visibly excited about what he's watching develop in real time, right in front of him, every single day. I also think it's worth mentioning how Bajakian described the quarterback room as a whole, because it tells you something meaningful about the culture being built here under Monken's broader system. He talked about it being conversational by design, not top-down, not dictatorial, not one voice barking orders while everyone else just nods along silently. He brings in his assistant quarterback's coach, brings in the quality control staff, and actively lets guys like Watson, who has real accumulated NFL game experience, and Shedeur and Gabriel, who bring their own distinct college backgrounds and different schematic exposures, contribute meaningfully to figuring out the best way to actually execute certain concepts on the field. That's a room built on genuine collaboration rather than rigid hierarchy. For young quarterbacks trying to find their footing at this level of competition, that kind of open environment tends to accelerate real development rather than stunt it. You're not just being told what to do and expected to silently comply. You're actually being asked how you see the play, how you read the defense, and your answer genuinely matters to how the offense evolves. And listen, I know there's a natural tendency in football media, and honestly in sports media in general, to discount almost everything coaches say publicly as just diplomatic spin, designed purely to protect competitive secrets or carefully manage public perception around a sensitive situation. I genuinely understand that skepticism, and most of the time it's earned. But when a coach goes out of his way to give a detailed, almost technical breakdown of one specific in-game read, down to describing the exact coverage rotation, the exact route concept, and precisely how the quarterback exploited that specific look, that's not vague spin anymore. That requires real, specific knowledge of the actual play call and the actual defensive disguise to even articulate accurately in the first place. You simply can't fake that level of granular specificity in a live, unscripted interview. Either he watched that exact rep happen with his own eyes and remembered the details clearly enough to describe it accurately months later, unprompted, or he's fabricating a very particular and very easily disprovable football detail in a public recorded interview, which would be an incredibly strange and pointless thing for any coach to do, especially one with this much experience and this much riding on his own credibility. So where does this actually leave us heading into the next phase of this offseason, with training camp now looming on the horizon and real competitive reps just around the corner? I think it leaves us with a far clearer, far more grounded picture than all the trade rumors and outside noise have been suggesting for weeks now. Shedeur Sanders is not just surviving in this quarterback room, quietly hanging on while everyone waits for him to get traded away. He's actively, visibly impressing the exact people whose entire professional job is to evaluate quarterback play at the highest level of detail, the people with the most to lose if they get this evaluation wrong. His preparation habits are being singled out by name. His field vision is being singled out with specific, concrete examples. His ability to process coverage and anticipate openings before they fully materialize is being singled out as genuinely rare. None of that sounds like a player on his way out the door in Cleveland. It sounds like a player quietly, methodically building the foundation for a much bigger role than some people outside that building are currently willing to admit, whether out of stubbornness, bias, or simply not having access to the information we just got handed directly from the source. The competition in that room is still very real, and I'm not pretending otherwise just to make a tidier story. Deshaun Watson's experience, his continued development, and his own genuine professionalism absolutely still matter to how this season eventually unfolds. Nobody serious is claiming that competition is already decided before a single preseason snap has been played. But based on what we just heard directly, in detail, from the man coaching this position every single day inside that building, the broader conversation around Shedeur Sanders should be shifting. Less speculation about trades and exit doors that, frankly, don't appear to exist anywhere outside of social media rumor mills. More genuine attention on what's actually happening on that practice field day after day, because according to his own quarterback coach, a man with 30 years of experience evaluating this exact position, what's happening is pretty remarkable for a player who's still this early in his professional journey. We'll keep tracking this story closely as training camp approaches and the picture becomes even clearer for everyone watching.